All right, so we're joined all the way from O'Fallon, Missouri, right there in the St. Louis area, by 22-year-old female pilot, Miracle Mays, who's also a small business owner, a musician, and all doing so much at such a young age. But just so cool that you're in aviation. And I got a room full here with me at Velma Jackson High School. We're also recording this for our friends at Rosa Scott, Madison Central High School, Germantown High School, Ridgeland High School, the Academic Options Center, and our YouTube channel. So we thank you so much for joining us because we're in the transportation, distribution, and logistics career cluster. And one thing that I really like to focus on is that there are so few African Americans, and especially African American females, in aviation, because right now in the United States, less than 1% of all female pilots are Black. And there's even fewer female pilots. I've flown maybe 30, 40 times in my life. I can remember one female pilot ever. So there is definitely a need for diversification in this field. And you're an instrument rated pilot. So take us to how you got into this and what all goes into it and what your next steps are. So I'd love to hear more about this.
Yeah, so like you said, I'm 22 years old. I started flying when I was 18. And I first wanted to do this when I was 10 years old. I read a book in school about a man who was a pilot and a missionary. And I was like, oh, that's cool. I'll do that. So that's how I advocate for kids reading, because that's how I found my calling. Then ever since then, I've just always loved it, been fascinated. I'm distracted every time I hear a plane go by. So I started flying when I was 18. I took my first flight and I was just hooked. Like, I knew I would love it, but at that point, it was like, oh, this is for me. It's just the most incredible experience. So I flew summer of 2019 is when I took my first flight. And then that September is when I started taking lessons. And then I had my pilot's license. Well, at that point, so that was end of 2019, and then COVID hit. So I couldn't fly for about 6 months. So I picked it up the next year, halfway through 2020, just about, and finished up in May of 2021. And then this past year in November, I got my instrument rating, which, if you don't know about that, so the private pilot's license enables you to fly in good weather when you can see, you know where you're going, you know where you're landing. And so the instrument license enabled me to fly in conditions that were less ideal, being able to fly in clouds when I can't see, which is super fun. Instrument is my favorite by far. So yeah, I just finished that up. And in April, I'm going to be going to a new flight school where I will be able to fast track through all the rest of my licenses. And at that point, then I'll be able to get a job. My goal is to fly corporate jets. I would like to fly for a charter service. So that's what I'm working towards.
Yeah, and just for, obviously a lot of people don't know, there is the private pilot license, which, like you said, it limits your altitude and what kind of weather you can fly in. Yeah. The instrument rating is the next step, and then your commercial license would be what we see on the airlines and the corporate jets and the private and the FedEx, UPS, because there's even though you hear things about the economy, the need for pilots is not ending.
Right.
Because everything has to be moved. Especially with online commerce. Things have to be shipped. Amazon, UPS, FedEx, DHL, all the postal service, always needing pilots. And then, like you said, on the corporate, there's private corporations that need pilots. Fortune 500 companies, if they got to go to a meeting, they need somebody to fly them there. So now talk a little bit about because it's more than just getting in the cockpit and getting on the controls. There's a lot of pre-flight things that go into it. You got to know the mechanical side. You got to leak the fuel for and see how the fuel looks, all kind of stuff. So talk a little bit about the pre-flight and then before you even take off.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there's a lot of prep that goes into it. I wish it were as easy as just hopping the plane and going, but that is not the case. And that wouldn't be very safe either. So like you said, there are a lot of things that we have to look over. Pilots are responsible to make sure that their plane is up to standards mechanically. We have to make sure all the inspections are done within the required time frames. We check the fuel every time, make sure it's clean, it wasn't contaminated overnight. Just to making sure that we can set ourselves up for the best case scenario flying every time. So if there were to be an incident that were to happen in the air or on the ground, we would know that we did everything that we could to prevent any incidents like that. So yeah, there's definitely a lot of prep mechanically and inspections that go into it. Also, weather is very, very important. So checking the forecast, when I usually am planning for a flight, I'll check a few days in advance just to see what the outlook is looking like. And then that morning up, if I'm going flying, I'll check again, make sure my clouds are at a good level, see if there's any storms in the area, see what the wind or the turbulence is looking like. I know in this time of year specifically, it is super, super windy and very windy around like season changes too. So it helps the longer you're flying, you get to learn the patterns of the seasons, the time of day, the area that you're in. It all varies. So yeah, there's definitely a lot of pre-flight check that goes in on that part.
Yeah, and you know, and that's part of the reason, unfortunately, so many females kind of steer away from this because the stereotype is girls don't know anything about engines, they don't know anything about fuel, so they're kind of steered to go in the opposite direction. But obviously, you're bucking that trend, and you've kind of made a change for it. So, what have you seen in the growth? Because you know, Sisters of the Skies, OBAP, some of these things
Yeah.
have really put in a big need and a big movement to diversify aviation because it's one of the last fields. You know, me and you talked before, the first all black female flight did not take place until 2009. So that was just 14 years ago. So it has just recently become more diverse.
Yeah.
What are some things that you're seeing that's made that happen?
I think the biggest thing is just exposure. Like one thing I've noticed, even for me, so pilots definitely tend to be like a legacy type job where if someone's dad was a pilot, then they become a pilot and their kids do. And for me, I break from that mold too, because I don't have any family that flies. And so a lot of the things are exposure, just people who don't know anyone who flies or have never flown before. I know a ton of people who've never been in a flight before even in their adulthood, which blows my mind because I love traveling. But it's just exposure. A lot of people just don't, it's not the type of job that's on people's radar. And so they don't see it as an option. And so it's really helpful to be able to expose even kids and high schoolers to this as an opportunity because it's not on people, like out of sight, out of mind.
Yeah.
People aren't thinking about planes flying overhead and seeing that as something that they can pursue. So it's definitely just getting the word out there and saying, like, hey, this is not limited to a certain demographic or a certain family or your family history. Like anyone can do this. And like you said, like with the mechanical side of things, it does tend to push certain people away from the field because it is very technical. But honestly, like once you get into it, if you're in the right field, you it's not super hard. Like there's a lot of studying that goes into it. Like don't get me wrong, it's a lot of work. But you don't have to be have a brain wired like an engineer in order for this to work. Like we have very good like general knowledge of mechanically how our planes work, but we're not the ones fixing it. We're not the ones putting it together. But I think people are deterred by how much they think they need to know. And in reality, like once you get into it, it's like, okay, you study, you work hard, you know your stuff, but you don't have to be able to build a plane from memory. You just need to know it well enough. So I
Yeah,
think exposure.
yeah, and we saw a news clip with Robin Roberts where she was talking about one thing is that because of financial restrictions, that pilot licensing for the longest time was extremely expensive, and it's still an investment, but it's become more affordable for that very reason because they want to be more diversified, and I think that was a big deterrent as well. But that's also changed, and with the pay that can be made as a pilot, you may be spending something up front, but that's a big investment that you would make back pretty quickly.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Now actually here in Mississippi, we actually have an undergraduate program at Delta State University in aviation. And we also
Oh,
have a
that's
community
great.
college program at Hines Community College that has a aviation program with their own private airport. So the need for this for anybody, male, female, whatever, is not going to end because like we said,
Right.
things are having to be shipped, things people have to be moved, people are on deadlines, people want to travel. And I
Yeah.
think this is also, you know, people say I want to travel, but I don't have a bunch of money. This is a
Mhm.
great way to be able to travel. I have a
That's true.
in Detroit, and she's not a pilot; she's a flight attendant, but she has literally seen the entire world by
Yeah.
having a job in aviation.
Yeah, it opens up a lot of doors and a lot of gateways. And even with people who get their pilot's license just for fun, like just for personal travel, like the owner of my school that I go to, he just started flying for the fun of it, takes his family on vacation all the time. He goes, flies to see his kids and grandkids. Like it just, my favorite way of describing even the benefits of flying is it just makes the world so much smaller. Like
Yeah.
places you never believed you could go or would have access to. Now it's like, oh, I can just take myself there. I can rent a plane from a nearby airport and just go fly somewhere. Like it just makes everything so much more accessible.
Yeah, and even if somebody doesn't want to have the stress of flying, there's all sorts of careers in aviation.
Yeah.
People think flight attendants, all they do is hand out drinks and snacks, but they're extremely important to a flight.
Yeah.
They have to know the safety. They have to, it's a lot of customer service. So like you said, people haven't
Mhm.
flown before. They're nervous on a plane. They have to have someone there to let them know how to handle it.
Right.
Because turbulence still makes me kind of nervous, but
Mhm.
as a pilot, it's just like hitting a bump in a road.
Yeah.
If people want to stay on the ground, there's a need for mechanics because, like you said yourself, the pilots are not the expert mechanics. There's
Right.
people had to be people there to work on the airplanes, and that would be on the corporate side, the commercial side, or again, even the FedEx and UPS side. Because if people need something moved, you got to have a vehicle that has a vehicle that works, and
Yeah.
aircraft mechanics are so vital to the transportation industry.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Can't work without them.
Now, obviously, with it being Black History Month, I thought it was important to to show some representation. So, what are have you seen you yourself personally any other Black female pilots to fly with?
I have not personally encountered anywhere I am. And even with you mentioning, like when you fly commercially, only seeing even one female, I've flown a lot and I have never been on a flight with a female captain or co-pilot. And definitely not a Black female captain or co-pilot. So yeah, I'm really not a lot where I am at all, which is why I think
Yeah.
exposure is so important because people have access to this. They just don't even realize what's available and what the opportunities are that they have. But personally, I have not encountered any.
Yeah, and that's why I did mention Sisters of the Skies, and I
Mm-hmm.
actually I'm gonna have Stephanie Grant here in a couple weeks in 2 weeks. I'm so
Awesome.
excited about having her. But
Yeah.
what if some way if people are interested in this, especially these young ladies, what are some organizations they can look at to start getting information on this stuff?
Yeah, Sisters of the Skies is awesome. I love what they do in encouraging and empowering women to step into an opportunity that they may not realize that they have available to them. And also the 99s is really, really big for females. They have chapters all over the country. They're amazing. Just really encouraging because it's helpful having not just community and education, but also mentorship is really important too to help women navigate what it looks like to have a job in a male dominated industry, and not everyone is as inclusive as you would like to believe they are. And so it's just really helpful to have a support system backing you saying, hey, you can do this. You deserve to be here just as much as any man, regardless of how old they are, how long they've been in this, what race they are. It's the support is just super, super valuable.
Now, before I get to the students' questions, since we have you here, you're also a small business owner.
Mm-hmm.
And we're getting ready to get into business administration. So that's actually our next cluster. But this is a good segue because gracefultrappings.com, I was looking through some of your products earlier, and it's quite impressive, your artistic
Thank
skills.
you.
So you turned in art to running a small business. So
Yeah.
tell us a little bit about that because I think that's super cool as well.
Thank you. That was very interesting. It definitely came out of the blue. Now, my family is very entrepreneurial. My mom's dad was an entrepreneur. She's owned multiple businesses. And I'm just not naturally wired for business. And because of that, it kind of made me like shut that out as an option. But I was realizing I started painting in 2019, April of 2019. And I've been writing poetry my whole life. And so around 2020, it's like, I should start sharing this with people because I had friends that had bought something from me on the side or commission work. And they're like, you should turn this into a business. And I was like, oh, okay, sure. So it was never something I was actually intentionally pursuing. It just kind of fell into my lap and being told, like, you have what you need to make money and to support what you're doing. Because it's also been really helpful too, like starting that business and the money I've made from it has helped me get to flight school. And because of the type of school I was going to, I wasn't able to get any loans for it. And so I made my money and put myself through school. So it was really helpful to have something on the side that funneled into another career. So they build into each other, which is really cool.
Yeah, and that's a great point because I did not realize until I started having entrepreneurial guests that most entrepreneurs have a day job. They usually have it's either something on the side or they do that and they have they're an employee on the side. So
Yeah.
having those multiple streams of income is so key, especially when you have a goal in mind like becoming a pilot. So
Yeah.
I would suggest to anyone, whether you want to be a pilot or you want to be a nurse or whatever, if it's going to cost you that extra, you can invest in yourself by doing things like
Yeah.
that. And something I always say, and the only regret I really have in my life is that I did not bet on myself sooner.
Hmm.
But betting on yourself is always the best bet of all.
Yeah.
And that's just so cool. But I do have some questions from the students, so I'll get to as
Yeah.
many of these as I can. And these are all ninth graders. So you're not much older than them, but
Yeah.
they're still got 3 years of high school left. This first one is Krishan Smith, and he asked, before you read about becoming a pilot, did you ever think you would be flying?
No, not at all. I'd only been on a plane once at the time. I was 5 years old and my family flew to Disney, but other than that, flying was never on my radar at all.
Yeah, but again, that all goes back to having that open mind and learning about things because you never know what you can find out about.
Right. Yeah.
This is Taylor Harris. She's one of our basketball players here, and she asked, "What is the biggest obstacles you have faced in your flight training?"
I think my biggest obstacle, not to be cliche, was definitely myself. I got hung up a lot in the book knowledge and all the stuff that I needed to know and have memorized and all the procedures. And I honestly, like you said, like I didn't really bet on myself being able to keep up with all the information. But once I got near the end of my training, it's like, okay, either I'm going to do it or I'm not. And I need to buckle down and get it done. And once I started like really believing that I could know everything I needed to, it got so much easier. Honestly, the biggest obstacle was believing that this was harder than it actually was because I made it a bigger issue in my head than
Yeah.
necessary.
Yeah, and then and again, I mean, you're right on the cusp of just becoming just such a rare place in your field, which is so cool.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this is a great question. This is to Kyria Watts, and she asked, "What advice would you give to someone who is afraid of flying?"
Ooh, mind over matter. Like it seems scary. And granted, I also have flown a lot more than most people. So I'm used to a lot of the things that I forget make people nervous, like turbulence. I don't really notice it at all. But I think honestly, the biggest thing is focus on the beauty of it, looking around you, looking down. Now, for if you're scared of heights, it's a little different, but even like motion sickness, it's all in your head. And so finding things to focus on that refocus, like this is something that's really incredible. Like the opportunity we have to fly is just it's so crazy. Like thinking before this was a thing, like this was such a foreign concept. And so now it's something that is beautiful and amazing. And so I think just focusing on the access that we have and how enjoyable it really is, just keeping your eye on the prize. I just like to say focus on one thing at a time because it can be scary and it can be stressful, even for me as a pilot. And so I just have to like take a step back and be like, this is beautiful. This is amazing. It's a cool opportunity. So yeah, but
Yeah.
I'm not discrediting the challenges either. Like turbulence can be scary and motion sickness is very real and does not feel good. So yeah, just finding other things to focus on that distract you from the things that make you nervous or anxious or in pain.
That's awesome. This is a good one. This is Jatavius White, and he asked, "As a female pilot, have you ever been treated differently because of your gender?"
Mm-hmm. Yes, I have. There was one specific incident where, so I worked for my flight school for a while. I worked in administration. And there was a gentleman that came in that was waiting to talk with someone else. And he was asking me if I flew too. And I said, yes, I was, and was explaining to him my goals. I wanted to go corporate. And he said, he's like, oh, you'll go to the front of the line of candidates just because you're a woman and the rest of us will have to wait our turn.
Ooh.
And yeah, fortunately, I had coworkers there that had my back because I was just like, honestly, just stunned by the fact that he would say that to my face and not think anything of it. But for me, it's like, I feel like there will always be the challenge of having to prove that I deserve to be where I am. And especially as a Black female, too, I get to check two minority boxes and always having the way that I earn my position questioned. Like, I am not a diversity hire. Like, I'm not here to make a company look
There
good.
you
Like,
go.
I worked hard and I'm a worthy candidate. So, yeah,
Absolutely.
that's one specific incident.
Absolutely. Now, I got two questions here from the same person. These are both fantastic. This is Jayla Graham. Our first one's about your writing, and she goes, "What is the biggest inspiration behind your writing?"
I think it is things that I wish people knew that I thought or felt, but didn't really have the opportunity or the boldness to tell them in the time. I write a lot of poetry about how I feel. It's kind of my way of journaling. And so then once I get to the point of really like processing how I feel too, it makes it easier to share that with other people. It also keeps me self-controlled where I don't say things I end up regretting later because I can write it down and then process
Yeah.
and go back to it later. So definitely just my thoughts or things I think about situations, people that it's just not the time to share, but I'm able to express that in a way that I still feel like my thoughts have been exposed or shared, even if it's not directly.
Yeah. Now, and this is a great question too, especially for our content of our class. She asked, if you wanted to join the Air Force, would that be a good option to learn to be a pilot?
Absolutely. 100%. I thought about Air Force. My dad was in the Air Force, not as a pilot, but I thought about it and just didn't feel like that was the route for me. But if you want to fly and the military is on your mind, I would 100% recommend it. They teach you so well, and it looks really good on your resume. Like once you retire, you could get a job flying anywhere, doing anything. Like it's a great opportunity. They help cover your schooling if you do anything afterwards, want to get extensive training. I would definitely recommend that.
Yeah, and you can learn to fly multiple types of aircraft in any branch, not just the Air Force, but the Army, Navy,
Yeah.
Marines all have pilots. So if
Mhm.
anybody wants to get paid to learn, the military would be a possible option if that's something they wanted to do.
Definitely.
Here's a good one. This is Jada Schaefer, and she asked, the first time flying, did you freak out when you saw all the buttons?
Yes, I did initially. There's not as many in the type that I fly as when like in a commercial cockpit where it's buttons all the way up the ceiling. It was not that intense, but it was definitely a little overwhelming, which is another thing that tends to deter people from flying is it's a lot to look at. But over time you learn everything to where now you have what we call flows where you just it's muscle memory. You know where your hands go. You don't have to look for everything and think about everything. But yes, first time is definitely overwhelming.
All right, I've got two more from the students. This is Jaden Thompson. And I know you did mention you had a break because of COVID, but he asked, how long was your pilot training in terms of length?
For my private license, yes, there were breaks in there which made it hard, but it took me about a year and a half counting my break, which depends on the type of school you go to, how long it will end up taking. But also funding matters too. So since I wasn't able to get a loan, all of my payment was out of pocket. So there are a lot of times like I didn't have a lot of resources. So I would fly for a few months and then I'd take some time off to save and then I'd go back to flying. So it depends. If you're going to college, obviously that's a different lineup. But yeah, it took me about a year and a half to get my private and a year to get my instrument.
Yeah, and that's why, it's like I said, we have the undergraduate aviation program here at Delta State in Mississippi, which would offer that. So if somebody wanted to be
Yeah.
able to qualify for a scholarship to the ACT, that would be an option. It could be affordable as well. So
Yeah.
again, multiple ways to get into this. Now, here's the last one from the students, and I don't know if we mentioned this, but this is Juliana King, and she wants to know the name of the school you went to because I know you were homeschooled
Mhm.
as far as high school, and you've had multiple schools you stopped at, but she wants to know the name of the flight school you went to and any other education you've had.
Yeah, so yes, I was homeschooled from fourth grade up until graduation. And then for flight school, I went to Elite Aviation in Chesterfield, Missouri. Great school. Love the staff, love my instructors. In this area specifically, they are the best school because they're flying newer planes that are well maintained. They have their own maintenance department, which is really nice and cool as a student too, because we got to go back there. Like when we were doing our systems lessons, we were actually able to go look inside an airplane, see, touch, feel what we were talking about. Just really made that knowledge stick, which was super helpful. And
That's
then now I'll be starting school at ATP in April, which is a very well-known school. Like they have pipelines to tons of companies, Delta, United, different airlines. And they are a school, they have 60 bases all over the US, and
wow.
it's a fast track program. So they will take you from having never flown before to teaching people how to fly planes with multiple engines in 7 months.
Yeah.
It's super fast, super, super fast. So
Yeah.
that's what I'll be doing to finish up the rest of my licenses.
Yeah, and that multiple engine is where the commercial comes in, because obviously the 99.9% of commercial aviation is multi-jet,
Right.
multi-engine jets. So
Yeah.
that's where the money is for
Oh,
people
yeah.
who don't know how much money you would make. But yeah, it does take those multi-steps of licenses. It's
Mm-hmm.
not just you do a class and you're flying. There's a lot that goes into it.
Yeah. There's
Um,
a lot.
but we're almost out of time, and we thank you so much for making some time for us. But
Yeah.
before we go, obviously we talked about the representation importance of aviation, but
Mm-hmm.
why does aviation need these young people to even consider becoming a part of such a fast growing and cool field?
Mm-hmm. I think it's eye-opening. I know for me, it really helps to put things in perspective of getting to see different communities, different environments, different demographics that you wouldn't have access to otherwise. I think it's also important too that the more of us are in it, the more minorities, the more women, the more of anyone that's in it, the more people get exposed to that being an opportunity. Like I think about how I had the fortunate experience of being able to learn about this through reading a book in fifth grade. But a
Yeah.
lot of other people that's not on their radar. And so I just think about the impact of like when I was 5, had I seen a Black female pilot in a plane, like that's that much earlier that I would have had this dream start in me. And so the more of us do it, the more of us see it. And it just continues to expand to give kids the opportunity. It's like, hey, like this isn't only for certain people, like everyone can do this.
Yeah, and the need is not going away. So
Right.
the aviation industry needs anyone that's interested to really take that step, and you're
Yeah.
a great example of that. So, and tell us where to find your products. Gracefultrappings.com.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Gracefultrappings.com. I'm also on Instagram, graceful_trappings.
Yeah, and a great Instagram follow, just so inspirational. All the stuff you
Thanks.
put, just been in just the last few weeks following you has been really cool to see all the stuff you do. So
Thank
again,
you.
Miracle Maze, all the way from O'Fallon, Missouri, in the St. Louis area, one of the next commercial Black female pilots in the United States. Thank you so much for making some time for us today.
Yeah, thank you for having me. This has been great.
All right, I'll talk to you soon.
All right, sounds good.
See ya.
Bye.